He awoke to darkness, an ancient, suffocating darkness that felt less like the absence of light and more like the weight of memory itself. For a long moment, Gilgamesh did not know whether he was breathing or drowning, whether the sensation upon his skin was the cold of stone or the embrace of centuries piled upon his slumber. His limbs resisted him as if they had been claimed by the earth itself, and his mind drifted between fractured echoes of a world long dead. He remembered the scent of cedar. He remembered the walls of Uruk rising under the desert sun. He remembered Enkidu's laughter carried by warm winds. But these memories felt impossibly distant, like half-forgotten dreams lingering in the corner of a dying mind. And then he heard it. A whisper of gold, no sound, yet all sound. A resonance that pierced the marrow of existence, vibrating through bone, blood, and spirit. It was not a voice in the mortal sense, for no lungs had produced it. It was a commandment, a pulse, a summons. It rippled through the ancient vaults beneath Holy Terra like a tidal wave of divine will, stirring dust that had lain undisturbed since before the age of ignorance. That lightless whisper dug into the petrified chambers of his heart and pulled him upward. His eyes opened. What greeted him was not the world he once ruled. The ceiling soared above him like a cathedral frozen in the agony of collapse, its arches carved not by mortal hands but by forces that seemed to mock time itself. Strange symbols glowed faintly across the stone, shimmering with a light that was neither flame nor sun. The air carried the metallic tang of machines vast, slumbering giants that hummed with quiet malice. Cables like the veins of a buried titan snaked across the floor, pulsing faintly with energy. This was no temple of his homeland, no resting place of kings. This was something older, deeper, constructed in the forgotten epochs before humanity had even spoken its first myths. Gilgamesh rose from the sarcophagus that had been both his cradle and his prison. The stone cracked beneath his strength that should have withered centuries ago, yet burned now with unnatural vigor. As he stepped onto the cold metal floor, a tremor coursed through the chamber, as though the world itself reacted to his presence. His bare feet met surfaces foreign to him, alloy and adamantium, cold and lifeless, unlike the sun-baked earth he once walked as a king. He felt the golden whisper again, stronger now, more insistent. It flowed through the veins of terror like molten fire, reaching him across layers of rock, ferrocrete, catacombs, and forgotten civilizations. It was the will of a being greater than any god he had ever invoked. It was a presence that eclipsed the primitive deities of his age, a presence that demanded obedience not through myth, but through the sheer gravity of its existence. His heart pounded. Not in fear. Gilgamesh had not known fear since the day he defied death itself, but in recognition. The presence felt familiar in a way he could not yet grasp, like the echo of a memory stolen from him long ago. And the more he felt it, the more he realized that his awakening was not an accident. Something had called him. Something had torn open the silence of centuries to drag him from the abyss. He moved forward, every step echoing across the cavernous expanse, and came upon corridors carved from obsidian and steel. Strange runes adorned the walls, warnings, perhaps, or prayers. He felt eyes upon him, though none were present. Surveillance systems long dormant flickered to life, scanning the figure striding through the vaults with the bearing of a king and the defiance of a demigod. When he reached the end of the hallway, he found a set of colossal doors fused shut by time and neglect. He pressed his hands against them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the metal groaned, ancient mechanisms screaming as they yielded to a strength that should not have existed. With a final wrenching roar, the doors split open, and a flood of harsh, blinding light devoured the darkness. Gilgamesh shielded his eyes, blinking as vision returned. And then he saw Terra. Not the Terra of his ancestors, not the cradle of mankind whispered about in ancient myths. This Terra was a monolith of despair, an impossibly vast labyrinth of Gothic spires, rusted machinery, shrines built upon shrines, its skies thick with the smoke of unending sacrifice. Colossal statues of forgotten heroes and tyrants towered above seas of humanity that crawled across the ground like swarms of insects. Enormous processions of priests marched through streets soaked in incense and ash, chanting praise to a golden god whose name he did not yet know. Starships the size of cities hovered above the skyline, their engines rumbling like the breaths of dying giants. And then, from deep within the planet's core, he felt it again, the golden whisper. But now, it carried agony, endless agony. Gilgamesh staggered as a torrent of psychic suffering crashed into his mind, billions of voices crying out, not in prayer, but in torment. The truth slammed into him with the force of a falling star. Something sat upon a throne of twisted machinery, consuming the souls of the innocent by the thousands each day, just to hold the universe together by a thread. He felt it like a knife twisting into his spirit. This world was dying. The golden light that had awakened him was the same light that now bled across reality, desperately trying to patch the fractures tearing through the warp. It was not the call of hope, it was the call of desperation. A summons from a being too powerful to perish, yet too afflict not ed to survive. Gilgamesh took a trembling breath, his pulse hammered against his ribs. He could feel ancient instincts stirring within him, the instincts of a ruler who once stared down the gods, the instincts of a warrior who fought beside monsters and kings, the instincts of a man who had stood at the edge of mortality and refused to fall. He understood nothing of this world, yet understood everything in one brutal revelation. Terra had become a graveyard built upon a throne of bones, and he, stranger, relic, king, had been awakened to walk among its ruins. He whispered into the stale, recycled air, his voice shaking with awe and fury. What has become of humanity? The golden whisper answered him, soft, sorrowful, and inevitable. And Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, hero of legends, felt the first tendril of destiny coil around him once more. They felt him before they saw him. In a shadowed hall high above the teeming hive of Holy Terra, a choir of astropaths knelt in a ring of dimly flickering lumen globes. Their eyes were long since burned away, their sockets sealed with scar tissue inscribed with sigils of warding. Silver cables and sanctified needles penetrated their skulls, feeding into a humming choir loom at the chamber's center. For hours they had chanted the same steady litany, holding open fragile conduits across the howling sea of the warp, carrying messages of war, famine, and faith to distant stars. And then, as one, they screamed. Their voices shattered the litany. Blood seeped from ruined eyes and ears. The choir loom spasmed, relays exploding in showers of sparks. Invisible currents surged through the chamber, rattling iron chains and sending parchment wards fluttering like frightened birds. Tech adepts rushed forward, shouting Binharic prayers as they attempted to stabilize the machinery, but it was not the machine that had broken. It was reality itself, flinching from a new presence. One astropath, lips trembling, managed to gasp a single phrase before collapsing, his mind charred like burnt parchment. He walks. The king walks. Across Terra, others felt it too. In a fortress monastery hidden deep within the labyrinthine underlevels, a grey knight froze in mid-strike, his training blade hovering a hair's breadth from his opponent's throat. His silver armor, etched with endless litanies of warding, thrummed with sudden resonance. The air thickened with unseen pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks. His opponent staggered, dropping his weapon, clutching at his chest. "Brother?" he gasped. The warrior removed his helm, revealing eyes that burned with cold, luminous intensity. He was no stranger to the presence of the warp. He had faced demons that were names and nightmares given flesh. But this was not the crawling malice of the dark gods. This was something different, older, not wholly of the warp, yet not bound by flesh alone. "A will has awakened on Terra," he said quietly, "and the galaxy trembles to make way for it." Far above, in a vaulted strategium lined with brass aquillas and banners faded by incense and time, an inquisitor stood before a vast hololithic display flickering with tides of data. Her face was a map of scars and long, sleepless years. Augmetic lenses whirred as she observed the sudden spikes in psychic activity screaming across the surface of the throne world, choirs overloading, Vox networks flickering, minor cults collapsing into hysteria, panic in the lower hives, ecstatic visions among the pilgrim masses. She watched the streams of information converge like rivers funneling into a single, inevitable sea. "Location?" she snapped. A robed savant at the console stammered, his fingers dancing over rune keys. Subterranean vaults beneath the Astra Telepathica sanctums, my lady. Depth classification. Pre-Imperial. Possibly pre-unification. Her eyes narrowed. Raise threat assessment to extremis. Notify Ordo Malleus. Notify the Adeptus Custodes. No word of this leaves this chamber without my seal. I want every scrap of data on that vault and anything tied to it. Artifacts, rituals, forbidden excavations, everything. She paused, listening to a faint echo that slithered through the back of her mind, like a chorus chanting in a language older than Gothic. And send me a kill team, she added. If something has risen from those depths, we will greet it with the Emperor's judgment. In the vaults below, Gilgamesh walked through corridors that had not known a living footstep for millennia. Strange machines along the walls stirred at his passing. Some attempted to awaken, whirring feebly before collapsing back into silence. Others simply hummed, their dormant power resonating with his presence. He did not know the purpose of these mechanisms, but he recognized their nature. They were tools, extensions of will, instruments by which mortals tried to impose order upon chaos. He had seen such arrogance before, stone towers clawing at the sky, temples raised to gods who did not answer, kings proclaiming their dominion over death itself. His own hands had helped build such monuments. His own pride had fed such illusions. Now the machines watched him with dead, glass eyes as he passed. He felt the world above like a weight pressing down upon him. The press of billions of lives, the constant psychic scream of a species stretched across the stars and bound by terror, faith, and ignorance. He could taste their fear in the stale air cycles. He could feel their prayers clinging to the walls like soot. Every whispered plea, every whispered heresy, every act of blind devotion, all of it drifted down through the foundations of terror, settling into the bones of the planet like dust. He knew, without knowing how, that his awakening had been felt. He had once walked through Uruk and watched men and women fall silent at his approach, their eyes lowering, their bodies bending in instinctive submission to the presence of their king. He felt something similar now, but magnified to a scale beyond understanding. The psychic field of humanity on Terra rippled with shock, awe, and something he had not expected. Hope. It was faint and confused, like the glimmer of a star glimpsed through smoke. But it was there. Some minds, somewhere above, had felt the touch of his awakening and reached toward it like dying men reaching for water. He did not know them. They did not know him. But the ancient instinct of humanity to kneel before something greater, to cling to symbols even as the void swallowed them, had already begun to weave him into their quiet, desperate mythologies. He turned a corner and found he was no longer alone. They stood in formation at the end of the hall, a wall of gunmetal, gold, and crimson. The first line were mortal soldiers, their flak armor reinforced with extra ceramite plates, each bearing the sigils of the Astra Militarum and various planetary regiments reassigned to Terra. Behind them loomed figures in heavier armor, red-hooded Skitarii with glowing bionic eyes and weapons humming with dangerous energy. Servo skulls circled above, their augers fixed upon him. At the center of this improvised barricade stood a woman in dark carapace armor, an inquisitorial rosette glinting at her breast. Her hair was bound back in a severe knot. Her gaze locked onto him with the focus of someone who had stared into the warp and refused to blink. "Identify yourself," she said, her voice amplified by unseen vox projectors. "By authority of the holy orders of the Inquisition, you stand upon sanctified ground of the throne world. You will kneel and submit to immediate sanction and evaluation." Soldiers around her tightened their grips on lasguns and plasma rifles. Safeties clicked off. Targeters adjusted. The air trembled with the anticipation of violence. Gilgamesh regarded them, and for a moment, the weight of their weapons and titles meant nothing. He saw fear glimmering behind visors and augmetics. He saw exhaustion etched into lines at the corners of the Inquisitor's eyes. He saw a people who had forgotten the meaning of their own myths, clinging instead to rituals and hierarchies like drowning men gripping wreckage. He felt no hatred for them, only sorrow. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened to his full height. He was unarmored, clad in strange, archaic garments, preserved by stasis fields beyond his comprehension. Yet there was something in the way he stood back straight, shoulders square, gaze steady that made more than one soldier's aim falter. The ancient echo of command rolled from him like heat from a forge. When he spoke, his voice carried not through vox or witchcraft, but by sheer weight of presence. "I am Gilgamesh," he said, "king of Uruk, son of Lugalbanda, slayer of beasts, breaker of walls, seeker of eternal life." The words fell into the silence like stones cast into a still pool. Ripples spread, touching minds primed with half-remembered legends. Some had heard those names in forbidden texts, in apocryphal sermons, in the drunken mutterings of voidsmen who loved old stories. The Inquisitor's gaze sharpened. "Those names are from myths," she said coldly. "From the dust of old earth. You claim kingship over a city that has not existed in recorded history for 10,000 years. He met her stare without flinching. "Then time has grown old while I slept," he replied. "Yet here I stand." For a heartbeat, there was only the hum of machinery and the distant, restless murmur of terror. The Inquisitor raised a hand. "Bind him," she ordered. "Alive. If he is what he claims, his secrets belong to the Emperor." Dozens of rifle barrels shifted, focusing on his chest and head. Gilgamesh did not move. He could have fought. Some dormant instinct within him uncurled, whispering that these weapons could not slay him, that his strength could shatter their bones and tear through their lines like parchment. But another instinct rose higher, the part of him that had once ruled not by brute force alone, but by understanding. A king who strikes before he listens is merely another beast. So he did something no warlord, no daemon, no false god would have expected. He knelt. The soldiers flinched as though struck. The psychic air around them twisted, not with submission, but with something deeper. The gesture did not feel like surrender. It felt like a mountain choosing to bow before the wind. "I will walk your path," Gilgamesh said softly. "I will stand before your god of gold and see the truth of this age with my own eyes." He lifted his head, and in his gaze burned not fear, but a fierce, terrible curiosity. "For if I have awakened into a world built upon bones and prayers," he murmured, "then I would know whose hand laid its foundation, and whether he is worthy of the sacrifice that sustains it." Above them, unseen, the golden whisper pulsed once more, approving, pained, and inexorable. The Imperium had found its ancient king. Whether it had gained a savior or invited its doom remained to be seen. They brought him upward through terror like a relic dredged from the ocean floor, half myth, half threat, suspended between awe and suspicion. Shackles of adamantium encased his wrists, though the custodians who escorted him understood the truth. The bindings were ceremonial. If the being who walked between them chose to break free, there were few forces in the galaxy capable of stopping him. Yet Gilgamesh did not struggle. He allowed the chains, allowed the armed escort, allowed the scrutiny of 1,000 scanners and augurs. He watched the procession of stone corridors and vaulted sanctums with measured, contemplative calm. He had been paraded like this once before, after conquering the cedar forest, after slaying Humbaba. Then, the people had howled with triumph and pride. Now, the silence of Terra's upper sanctums felt like a tomb, a funeral march, not a celebration. Servo skulls drifted around him like carrion birds, their lenses whirring as they recorded every motion, every shift of expression. The Inquisitor from before walked at the head of the escort, her carapace armor rattling softly with each step. Behind Gilgamesh, Skitari marched, their metallic feet striking in perfect, mechanical rhythm. Custodians flanked him, towering like golden gods, each one radiating psychic pressure that would have crushed the mind of a normal man. Gilgamesh felt it like a cold wind chilling, but unable to penetrate the fire at his core. He climbed deeper into the heart of the imperial palace. With every level ascended, he felt the golden whisper grow stronger. It no longer felt like a summons, it felt like a tide, rising and falling with the pulse of a dying god. At last, they reached a colossal set of doors, carved with reliefs depicting battles, crusades, and triumphs of ages long past. Gilgamesh paused, studying the scenes. The artistry was exquisite, the subject matter was horrifying. A giant clad in radiant armor marched across the panels, his face stern and timeless, his blade raised as entire legions knelt behind him. Gilgamesh traced the figure with his eyes. He recognized the authority in that stance. He recognized the weight of command. He had taken such poses once, in the Age of Kings, but the giant on the door was no mortal king. "The Emperor," the Inquisitor said, noticing his gaze. Gilgamesh replied quietly, "I know this figure, though I have never seen him with mortal eyes." The custodians exchanged glances, brief, subtle. The doors opened with a groan like the planet itself exhaling. A harsh golden light spilled into the corridor. The air grew heavy. The hairs on Gilgamesh's arms rose. His breath caught not in fear, but in recognition so profound it shook him. They entered the throne hall. It was impossible to describe in human terms. Everything felt too immense, too saturated with the echoes of an entire species' despair. Pillars rose into darkness, vanishing into a ceiling choked with incense smoke and the ghosts of a million prayers. Choirs of robed servitors chanted ceaselessly, their voices blending into a monotonous dirge. Cables as thick as tree trunks slithered across the floor, connecting into a monstrous contraption at the room's center. And upon that contraption sat a corpse that refused to die. Gilgamesh felt his knees weaken not from reverence, but from the sheer psychic pressure emanating from the throne. The Emperor's body was desiccated, skeletal, crowned with metal tubing, bound to the golden throne by machinery older than continents. Yet his presence filled the hall like a sun barely held in check. Gilgamesh struggled to breathe. His vision wavered. Memories not his own stabbed into his mind like shards of burning glass. A young man walking across the old earth. Legions forged from his gene seed. A galaxy aflame with ambition. A son standing upon a bridge of a dying starship, tears and blood staining his armor. A betrayal that sundered the heavens. A last battle fought above Terra, where brother struck brother and gods feasted upon the aftermath. Gilgamesh gasped, clutching his temples. He staggered backward but did not fall. A custodian stepped forward, spear lowering, but another raised a hand to halt him. They watched. The golden whisper that had haunted his awakening now roared like a tidal wave. Gilgamesh forced himself upright. He stepped forward. The Inquisitor knelt. The Skitarii knelt. Even the servitors paused in their chanting for a fraction of a second. The custodians did not kneel, but they inclined their heads in the smallest, most rigid sign of respect. Gilgamesh alone did not kneel. He stood before the Emperor the way a king stands before another king equal, questioning, unafraid. The Emperor's eyes did not open. Yet Gilgamesh felt them. A presence vast beyond comprehension pressed into his mind. It was not gentle. It was not warm. It was the weight of a billion souls burning away each day to keep the galaxy from collapsing. It was the memory of unending war. It was a will so strong it had chained gods, shattered armies, and torn open reality itself. Gilgamesh felt the pressure rise, crushing his lungs, grinding his bones. His vision blurred with gold. His heart pounded as if trying to tear free from his chest. He understood now why so few could stand before the golden throne and remain intact. It was not merely the Emperor's psychic presence, it was the raw truth of what the Imperium had become. "Why?" Gilgamesh whispered through clenched teeth. "Have you awakened me?" The answer was not a voice. It was a flood. His mind was ripped open. He saw visions. A golden figure forging 20 suns from his own essence. The warp twisting and corrupting. The Primarchs scattered like seeds across the galaxy. A dream of unity shattered by pride, betrayal, and madness. The Emperor's broken body dragged to the throne. 1,000,000 years of stagnation, corruption, and unending sacrifice. The Astronomicon flickering like a dying star. And at the center of it all, the Emperor's will reaching out, desperate, frayed, yet unyielding. Gilgamesh collapsed to one knee, gasping. The psychic torrent ceased, leaving him trembling, drenched in sweat, breath burning in his lungs. But he understood. The Emperor had not awakened him to be a weapon, not to replace a Primarch, not to lead a legion, not to seize a throne. He had been awakened because he was something else, something the Emperor had once tried to create but failed to shape fully. A prototype. A first draft of what would one day become the Primarchs. An echo from a forgotten attempt at human perfection. Gilgamesh felt a strange emotion stir within him, not pride, not fear, but the hollow ache of revelation. "I am your fragment," he whispered. "Your lost design." The Emperor's presence pulsed in response. Agreement. A truth sealed beneath millennia of dust, now laid bare. The Inquisitor rose slowly, staring at him. Her voice was hoarse. "What did you see?" Gilgamesh did not answer her. He lifted his gaze to the Emperor's corpse, a king confronting another king, and spoke words that reverberated through the very foundations of the throne hall. "You built a dream," he said, "and it devoured itself." He rose to his feet. "But I am not your son," Gilgamesh continued, voice steady, resonant. "I am not bound to your failures or your triumphs. I am older than your empire and shaped by a world that has long turned to dust." Custodians stiffened. The Inquisitor took a step back. Even the chanting faltered. Gilgamesh pressed a hand against his chest, feeling the weight of his own heartbeat. "I have known the folly of kings. I have seen the cost of ambition. I have fought gods and I have mourned men." He stepped closer to the throne. "And now I see a god who has trapped himself upon a seat of agony, held aloft by chains of his own making." A tremor passed through the golden throne, subtle but undeniable. Gilgamesh spoke in a whisper meant only for the Emperor. "Did you awaken me to save your Imperium or to destroy it?" For the first time, he felt something new in the golden presence. Not command, not power, not suffering, but hesitation. Gilgamesh drew a breath, slow and steady. His words were quiet, but they carried through the chamber like a prophecy. "If I am your echo, then I will choose my own path." He turned, chains rattling against the cold stone. Behind him, the custodians moved to escort him. The Inquisitor followed, her mind shaken, her conviction trembling. Every step echoed through the throne hall like a drumbeat announcing a new era. The Emperor remained still upon his throne, but his golden whisper tracked Gilgamesh until the moment the doors closed, sealing the throne hall once more in eternal, suffocating light. And for the first time in 10,000 years, something in that light had changed. They led him through the labyrinth of the Imperial Palace, deeper into its arteries of steel and stone, where only the highest echelons of Terra's rulers ever walked. The custodians guided him in silence, their auramite armor gleaming like small suns in the suffocating gloom. The Inquisitor followed at a distance, her mind a knot of caution and suspicion, her steps marked by the weight of a woman who knew she had just witnessed something she was never meant to see. Gilgamesh walked at the center of the procession, the chains at his wrists clinking softly with each stride. But the custodians now understood what the Inquisition did not. The chains were irrelevant. They had seen how he stood before the Emperor, how the oppressive psychic tide had washed over him like a storm breaking against an unyielding cliff, how he had gazed into the eyes of a god and not broken. As they emerged into a vast courtyard, one of Terra's rare open spaces untouched by the endless towers of bureaucracy, Gilgamesh paused. The air here was thinner, cleaner, cold as the shadow of a dying star. Colossal statues surrounded them, each depicting a Primarch in impossible detail, frozen forever in the moment of their greatest triumph. Lionel Johnson, blade raised. Rogel Dawn, unbending sentinel of stone. Vulcan, hammer at rest, yet ready to break worlds. Dawn light filtered through high archways, casting long, skeletal shadows. Gilgamesh felt their silent stares. "They were your children," he murmured, "forged from your flesh, raised to wage wars you could not fight alone." A custodian stopped beside him. The warrior's voice was deep, resonant, like stone grinding against stone. "They were perfection given form," the custodian said, "and imperfection given destiny." Gilgamesh's eyes traced the sculptures, these giants who had once shaped the galaxy by their mere existence. He felt a strange pull, as though he were looking upon echoes of brothers he had never met, siblings forged in the image of a father he had just confronted. "Do they know?" Gilgamesh asked quietly. "What price was paid to create them?" "No," the custodian replied. "And now, they never shall." There was no condemnation in his voice, no mourning, only the solemn acceptance of a truth lived for 10,000 years. They continued onward until they reached a long promenade overlooking the lower levels of the palace. From this height, Gilgamesh could see the underhives sprawling like wounded beasts, the flickering lights of billions struggling to survive in the choking smog. He could hear the faint chants of pilgrims, their voices rising like dust into the air. Yet beneath the prayers, he heard something else, something Terra's rulers pretended not to hear. Whispers. The whispers of cults worshipping false gods. The whispers of citizens driven mad by hunger and despair. The whispers of chaos brushing against cracked minds. He exhaled. "You call this the heart of your empire," he said softly. "But I see only a body kept alive by pain." The Inquisitor stepped forward at last. "Watch your tongue, Ancient One," she hissed. "You stand in the throne world of the master of mankind. The Imperium has endured for millennia. You know nothing of the sacrifices that preserve it." Gilgamesh turned his gaze upon her, and she faltered. His eyes were not the eyes of a mere man. They held storms, kingdoms, the stubborn grief of a ruler who had outlived all he ever cherished. "I know sacrifice," he said. "I buried my closest friend with my own hands. I walked to the edge of the world seeking the secret of immortality and found only the lesson that no king, no matter how mighty, escapes time." He gestured toward the hives. "Your empire has escaped nothing. It has merely traded one doom for another." The Inquisitor bristled. "You presume to judge us? You, a relic from a stone age, think you understand the burden of ruling a million worlds?" Gilgamesh studied her with something between pity and curiosity. "I was a king before your ancestors learned to sharpen stone. I knew what it meant to lead, to protect, to fail. That is why I see what you cannot." He pointed to the sky, where the smog parted just enough to reveal a faint golden shimmer, the Astronomicon, flickering dangerously. "You have built a throne upon the bones of your people. You feed their souls to a god who cannot die, and you call it salvation." The custodians stiffened. The Inquisitor reached for her rosarius. The Skitari raised their weapons in unison. Gilgamesh did not flinch. "Is this the destiny of humanity?" he asked. "To live in chains of fear and ritual? To crawl beneath the weight of a corpse god? To forget its own greatness?" Something broke inside the Inquisitor, then not resolve, not faith, but a thin membrane of certainty that had shielded her from her own doubts. She tightened her grip on her weapon. "You speak heresy." Gilgamesh's voice was calm, even gentle. "No, I speak truth, and truth is always heresy to those who fear it." The wind stirred across the promenade, carrying the distant moan of engines, the rumble of Titan footsteps, the cries of pilgrims, and the ceaseless whisper of the warp. Gilgamesh closed his eyes. He saw the Imperium's rot spreading through the stars, hive worlds choking on their own population, forge worlds enslaved to their machines, Astartes chapters fractured into zealotry and madness, faith weaponized, hope strangled, billions dying nameless deaths each day to preserve the illusion of stability. He opened his eyes. "When I walked among my people," he said, "I sought to protect them, to build walls that would endure. But walls alone cannot save a kingdom when rot begins within." He turned back to the Inquisitor. "Your Imperium has forgotten the meaning of its own name." "We survive," she spat. "That is all that matters." Gilgamesh stepped closer, the chains clinking softly. "Survival without meaning is not life. It is a slow death, stretched across millennia." A heavy silence descended. The custodians exchanged silent signals, gestures older than the Imperium itself. The Skitari remained motionless, awaiting new calculus directives. Gilgamesh looked once more across Terra. He saw humanity reduced to ash. He saw glory devoured by bureaucracy. He saw faith twisted into tyranny. And in that moment, something ancient stirred within him. Not rage, not grief, but conviction. He straightened, and the power within him surged, subtle yet undeniable. The air shimmered, the chains around his wrists trembled. The custodians noticed. Their spears lowered, golden blades humming with caged fury. "Stand down," one of them commanded. "Do not test the patience of the Emperor's shadow." Gilgamesh looked upon them, and his voice was quiet but unbreakable. "I will serve no shadow." A dangerous pause followed. "Then what?" the Inquisitor whispered. "Do you serve?" Gilgamesh looked inward, through the layers of memory and myth, past the illusions of immortality, down to the core of the man who once ruled Uruk. "I serve humanity," he said. "Not this broken husk of an empire, not the chains you have forged for yourselves. I serve what you once were, what you could be again." He raised his head to the dawn breaking faintly through Terra's poisoned sky. "If a king must rise to remind you," he murmured, "then so be it." The wind whipped around him. The golden whisper stirred. Even the custodians felt it. A shift, a ripple, a new variable entering a stagnant equation. The Inquisitor stared at him with widening eyes. "Are you declaring yourself a rebel?" she breathed. Gilgamesh shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Not yet." He stepped forward, his chains glinting in the light. "But I will not swear fealty to a dream that devours its own children." The custodians moved as one. Spears crossed. The Skitari raised their weapons. The Inquisitor stepped back, trembling with a fear she could not admit. And Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, first echo of the Primarchs, awakened relic of humanity's forgotten dawn, smiled. Not with mockery, not with arrogance, but with the grim, weary promise of a man who had once defied gods and was prepared to do so again. "I will walk your terror," he said. "I will see its truth with my own eyes. And when I choose my oath, it will not be given lightly." The chains fell silent. The air held its breath. The Imperium did not yet know it, but a new oath, born of an ancient king, was beginning to form. An oath that could save the galaxy, or burn it. They felt him in the warp long before the first scream rose from Terra's streets. In the roiling currents beyond reality, where thought became flesh and emotion turned to storm, a new presence disturbed the endless circulation of madness. It was not a demon roaring into existence, nor a sorcerer reaching greedily across the veil. It was something older and far more offensive to that twisted realm. A mortal will that refused to bow. The warp shuddered, threads of fate tangled. For the briefest moment, four vast hungers turned their gaze in unison toward a single point of light flickering upon the surface of Holy Terra. Khorne tasted it first. The blood god's realm fortresses made of bone, rivers of boiling gore thrummed as Gilgamesh's awakening replayed through the tides of psychic resonance. Battles fought, monsters slain, gods defied. A life defined by struggle and the joy of conquest. A warrior king who wielded strength not as a gift, but as a responsibility. The skulls piled upon Khorne's throne rattled with anticipation. "A champion," the red god snarled, not in mockery but in appraisal. "One who has slain beasts and kings. One who knows battle not as sport, but as burden. His rage is tempered by purpose. It would burn worlds well." Next, the presence brushed against shifting strands of fate, and there, in labyrinthine halls of ever-changing script, Tzientch crackled with interest. The Changer of Ways watched visions of Gilgamesh standing before the golden throne, defiant and unbroken. An old design, Tzientch realized a fragment of a plan the Emperor had dared to weave without consulting the architect of fate. "How curious," Tzientch whispered, voices overlapping in endless layers. A prototype left buried, a variable reintroduced into an equation thought complete. Oh, how beautifully this could fracture things. In gardens of rot and joyless patience, Nurgle smiled. He had little interest in swords and thrones, but he felt the stubborn endurance that clung to Gilgamesh like mold to damp stone. A man who had refused to accept death, who had walked the edge of mortality and returned. Nurgle found that kind of refusal endearing. And in a palace of sensation built from screams and ecstasy, Slaanesh merely watched. Desire, pride, longing for meaning, all of it sang in Gilgamesh's heart like strings begging to be plucked. Four gods considered the same question. What, they wondered, would it take to break him? Reality answered almost at once. On Terra, deep beneath a shrine like Hablock choked with incense and desperation, a cult stirred from half-life into fervor. They had always been there, hiding in the cracks of the city, men and women who had looked upon the Imperium's promises and found only hunger, filth, and the slow death of anonymity. They gathered in their hidden chapel now, not to praise the Emperor, but to beg anything else to notice them. On that day, something did. The psychic shockwave of Gilgamesh's confrontation with the Emperor had ripped through the warp like a flare. It had illuminated all the hairline fractures already etched into the barrier between realities. One of those fractures ran straight through this forgotten shrine. Candles guttered, icons of the Aquila blackened and warped. A fresco depicting the Emperor's ascension melted into a screaming, eyeless mockery. The air thickened, cloying, sweet, and rancid at once. Voices that were not voices whispered promises into desperate minds. "You are forgotten," they cooed. "But we have seen you. We have always seen you." When the first daemon slipped through, it did so like mold creeping through damp wood softly, almost lovingly. A shadow detached itself from the wall, unfurling into a lank, many-limbed horror with too many mouths and eyes that never stopped smiling. Others followed, clawed hands caressed the air. Tongues tasted fear like wine. The cultists dropped to their knees, sobbing in ecstasy and terror. Above, alarms began to scream. In a chamber not far from the promenade where he had spoken his oath, Gilgamesh felt it a shiver in the fabric of existence, a sour note in the unending chorus of human suffering. It was not like the Emperor's golden pressure. This was different. This was hunger wearing masks. This was chaos made intimate. His fists clenched. "What is that?" he demanded. A custodian turned sharply, helm tilting as he listened to silent Vox traffic. "Localized warp breach," the warrior answered. "Minor. Contained." A pause. For now. Gilgamesh's jaw tightened. "You allow such things to fester on your own sacred world?" The Inquisitor's face hardened. "We do not allow them. We endure them. Chaos is a plague that seeped into every crack long before you awoke. We contain outbreaks. We purge. We rebuild. It is a never-ending war." She met his gaze. "You cannot comprehend the scale." He took a step toward her, the chains at his wrists clinking. "Then show me," he said. Minutes later, they descended. The elevator was little more than a reinforced cage bolted to the side of Terra's rotting interior. As they dropped through layer after layer of crumbling infrastructure and thickening smog, Gilgamesh saw how far from its legends the throne world had fallen. Machinery older than empires leaked oil like blood from open wounds. Hab blocks leaned drunkenly against each other, their foundations long since eroded. Pilgrims shuffled along crowded walkways, eyes vacant, lips moving in endless prayer. "Does he hear them?" Gilgamesh asked quietly, staring at the hollow faces. "The Emperor hears all," the Inquisitor replied automatically. Gilgamesh did not bother to hide his doubt. The breach was only a small one by the standards of the 41st millennium, a single building swallowed by unreality, a few streets around it twisting at the edges as if unsure of what shape they were meant to hold. But for the people trapped within, it was the end of the world. They emerged into a plaza lit by flickering lumen strips and the hellish glow seeping from the shrine's broken windows. The air here hummed with corruption. Symbols had begun to writhe on the walls, their meanings shifting like thoughts in a fever dream. Screams echoed from inside some human, some unmistakably not. A cordon of militarum troops held position at the perimeter, lasguns aimed but hands shaking. Several bodies lay where they'd fallen, torn open by invisible claws or melted into grotesque sculptures of flesh and faith. The Inquisitor barked orders. "Containment pattern Gamma 7. No one enters without sanction. Vox link to the Ordo Malleus detachment on standby." She broke off as Gilgamesh walked forward. Chains still bound his wrists. He had no armor, no weapon, no sigils of warding etched into his flesh. Yet as he approached the border of the breach, the warp itself seemed to recoil. The air around him cleared by a fraction. The whispers grew quieter, wary. A dozen guns tracked him. "Stop," the Inquisitor snapped. You will not cross that threshold. You do not understand what waits inside." Gilgamesh looked back at her. "I was born in an age of gods and monsters," he said simply. "I understand enough." He stepped into the glow. Reality wavered. The plaza vanished. He stood within the shrine. It was larger on the inside now. Walls stretched impossibly high, covered in pulsating flesh and crumbling scripture. Candles burned with colors no human tongue could name. The floor crawled. Faces pushed up through the stone, screaming silently before sinking again. The cultists were scattered across the space, some kneeling in rapture before writhing altars, others fused into the architecture, their bodies transformed into living icons of agony. At the shrine's center, a daemon watched him. It wore a humanoid shape as a mockery, limbs too long, joints bent backward, fingers ending in delicate claws slick with blood. Its head was a smooth, featureless oval, except for a single vertical slit that opened and closed like a wound, spilling whispers into the air. "Ah," it sighed. "The king." Gilgamesh felt the warp pressing against his mind, probing, testing, seeking purchase. It found grief, it found pride, it found a stubborn refusal to bow that tasted like the finest spice. "You are seen," the demon cooed. "By gods greater than this corpse world. By powers who could raise you above all thrones. Why kneel before a dead man nailed to a machine when you could rule as you were meant to?" Gilgamesh stepped forward. The floor buckled, trying to swallow his feet. Visions clawed at his thoughts, himself seated upon a mountain of skulls, the galaxy burning at his command, the warp bending to his will. For a heartbeat, he saw it, felt it, the intoxicating ease of abandoning struggle and surrendering to pure, unleashed power. He remembered another temptation, the promise of immortality, the herb at the bottom of the sea, the serpent that stole it from him. He had learned once that shortcuts to eternity were always lies. He bared his teeth. "You are not the first to offer me a crown," he said, "and you will not be the last." The daemon laughed, a sound like glass breaking in reverse. "You cannot fight us, little relic. You have no wards, no sigils, no blessed weapons. You are a naked soul in the dark." Gilgamesh's answer was simple. "I have myself." The warp pressed harder. He pressed back. Not with ritual, not with psychic technique, but with sheer, unbroken will. The same will that had once defied death itself. The same will that had stood before the golden throne and refused to kneel. The shrine shook. The walls convulsed, flesh sloughing off in sheets. The daemon's whisper faltered, its head tilting in sudden, sharp interest. "Impossible," it hissed. "You are only—" Gilgamesh moved. He tore the chains from his wrists as if they were made of twine. Metal screamed and shattered. In the same motion, he crossed the distance between them, muscles surging with preternatural strength. His fist crashed into the daemon's chest. For an instant, it felt like punching smoke. Then the smoke screamed. The force of the blow rippled through the warped flesh, unraveling sigils and tearing through the unstable matter that bound it. The demon staggered, form flickering. "You are not human," it rasped. Gilgamesh grabbed it by the throat. "I am everything human should have been," he growled. He drove it downward. The impact ruptured the shrine's floor, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the corrupt architecture. Light, cold, clean, real, speared up from below, burning away the crawling flesh. Outside, the troops watched in stunned silence as the building convulsed. Unholy light fountained from its windows. Then, slowly, impossibly, the warp glow began to fade. Inside, the daemon writhed in his grasp, its form collapsing. "You could have ruled," it gurgled. "You could have." Gilgamesh tightened his grip. "I have ruled," he said, "and I have failed. I will not fail again by becoming you." He crushed its throat. The demon burst into smoke, into shrieks, into tatters of unreality that the Emperor's distant light devoured the moment they were exposed. The shrine screamed as it shrank back into its mortal dimensions, stone reasserting itself where flesh had grown, icons regaining their original, dogmatic shapes. Gilgamesh stood alone in the center, chest heaving. The cultists lay scattered, unconscious or dead. Some, perhaps, could still be saved. Most could not. He walked back to the doorway. When he stepped out into the plaza, the soldiers flinched. The Inquisitor stared, disbelief warring with horror in her eyes. The custodians regarded him with a new stillness, as if reassessing the parameters of reality. "You," the Inquisitor whispered, "you went in unwarded, unarmed. You faced a manifested warp entity and did not fall." Gilgamesh wiped Daemon blood, if it could be called that, from his hand. "You fight these things every day," he said, "and still you let their masters whisper into the cracks of your empire." The golden whisper brushed the edge of his thoughts, again approval mixed with pain. Far away, in a realm without distance, four gods reconsidered their earlier question. What would it take to break him? More, they realized. Much more. And the game, at last, had truly begun. They carried the bodies out, first some whole, some warped beyond recognition, others still breathing faintly, their minds flickering like candles nearly snuffed. Gilgamesh stood apart from the commotion, watching the aftermath with the expression of a man who had seen too many tragedies to count. The air of the plaza was thick with disinfectant sprays, vox traffic, and the rattled voices of soldiers who had narrowly avoided being devoured by the insanity within the shrine. But Gilgamesh's eyes were far away. He had seen the truth inside that corrupted chapel, not merely the demon or the illusions it had conjured, but the fragility of Terra itself. The throne-world fortress of humanity, cradle of faith, capital of a million worlds, was not unbreakable. It was riddled with cracks through which madness seeped like rot beneath a coat of gold. The Inquisitor approached him at last, her face pale but resolved. "You survived," she said quietly, as though still trying to convince herself. "You dispelled a Daemon incursion alone." Gilgamesh did not look at her. "Your world is sick. Chaos gnaws at its bones." She stiffened. "We are not ignorant of its presence. We fight it day and night." "And still it grows," he replied, "because you treat symptoms and ignore the wound." A flare of anger showed in her eyes. "You know nothing." "No," Gilgamesh interrupted. "I know too much." He turned to her fully, and she froze. His eyes were not merely eyes anymore, they carried a strange luminescence, something ancient stirring behind them, something that had awakened in the shrine, something that had stared into the warp and not blinked. He took a step forward. "When I fought the Daemon, it probed my mind. It saw my past, my fears, my pride. It tasted everything that makes me human. But there was something within me it could not grasp." The Inquisitor swallowed. "And what was that?" Gilgamesh looked toward the sky, toward the flickering Astronomicon, barely visible through Terra's polluted haze. "Purpose," he said. "A purpose older than your Imperium, older than your Emperor's dream. A purpose buried with me until the Golden Call woke it." He paused. "And now I see why." The custodians stepped closer, their watchful helms tilted toward him. Even they sensed the shift. Something intangible clung to Gilgamesh, an aura not of psychic mutation, but of destiny sharpening its blade. The Inquisitor found her voice again. "The Emperor must have awakened you for a reason," she said. "What did he show you? What truth did he imprint upon your mind?" Gilgamesh's jaw tightened. "He showed me what is coming." For the first time since their meeting, she saw fear flicker in his expression, not fear for himself, but for humanity. "The Great Rift," he murmured. "The galaxy is split in two. The warp storm widens, chaos gathers its hosts. The last bulwarks crumble. There will be a war that dwarfs all before it." He met her eyes. "And Terra will burn unless it changes." A heavy silence fell. The plaza's ambient noise seemed to recede, leaving only the hum of engines and the distant cries of pilgrims drifting through the air like ghosts. The Inquisitor's voice was barely audible. "And what would you have us do?" Gilgamesh gestured to the hive around them, the rusted towers, the choking smog, the endless lines of ragged workers marching like condemned souls. "Look at your people," he said. "They live without meaning, without hope. They serve a machine they do not understand, bleeding their lives into an empire that has forgotten them." He placed a hand against his chest. "In my age, I believed power alone could protect my kingdom. I built walls that reached the heavens. I carved my name into stone and believed it would defy time. But walls crumble, stones weather. A king does not protect his people by being above them. His voice deepened, carrying a resonance that made even the custodians straighten. A king protects by walking among them. The Inquisitor shook her head slowly. You do not understand, Terra. We cannot simply. Then I will learn, he said. She blinked. What do you mean? Gilgamesh stepped toward the plaza's edge, overlooking miles of hive sprawl writhing with life and misery. I will walk your underhives, your manufactorums, your temples, your fields of the dead. I will learn what your people suffer and why chaos whispers so loudly here. He glanced back at her. If I am to choose a side in this age of madness, I will not base it on thrones or banners or decrees. I will choose based on what I see with my own eyes. The custodians raised their spears. You cannot simply wander the throne world, one said. This planet is sacred, it is dangerous, it is forbidden. Gilgamesh smiled a weary, sardonic expression. Everything truly worth knowing is forbidden. The custodian's grip tightened. The Inquisition will not allow it. Gilgamesh's smile faded. Then stop me. For a heartbeat, Terra held its breath. The custodians, though peerless warriors, did not move. They had seen enough, they sensed enough. Something within Gilgamesh had been measured and found incompatible with coercion. He was not a prisoner. He had merely been escorted. The Inquisitor's voice broke the silence. If you walk Terra, she warned, you will see horrors you cannot imagine. Gilgamesh's gaze hardened. I have walked through kingdoms crushed by their own pride. I have buried those I loved. I have stared into death's face and returned. Show me horrors I will not turn away. She exhaled. If you go without sanction, they will kill you. Gilgamesh stepped past her. They can try. He walked for hours. They shadowed him at a distance. Skitari, custodians, covert inquisitorial agents disguised among the masses. But Gilgamesh moved with a singular purpose, descending through layers of architecture and history until he reached the underbelly of the throne world. Down where sunlight never touched. Down where the stench of humanity's suffering clogged the lungs. Down where chaos whispered most sweetly. He passed manufactorum lines where children too thin to stand swung tools heavier than their arms. He saw vast morgues where bodies were stacked in endless rows, destined not for burial but for incineration to fuel the very machines that oppressed them. He saw preachers screaming scripture at crowds that stared with empty eyes, their faith hollow from starvation and exhaustion. He saw soldiers dragging away dissidents whose only crime was questioning why their rations had been halved again. He saw a woman clutching the corpse of her newborn, begging the sky for a miracle that would never come. Terra was a world of miracles, just not for its people. Gilgamesh knelt beside the grieving mother. She did not flinch. She was far beyond fear. He touched the infant's cold forehead, and his heart clenched. This is your empire, he whispered. Not in condemnation, but in mourning. A figure stepped out of the shadows. A ragged man with sunken cheeks, holding a tattered book of forbidden scripture. His eyes flickered with the same madness Gilgamesh had seen in the shrine, yet beneath the madness, he sensed pain, not malice. You feel it too, the man whispered. The crack in the sky, the dead gods screaming, the lies. Another figure emerged, then another. Soon a dozen surrounded him, pilgrims, sinners, workers, zealots. At first, Gilgamesh thought they were forming a mob, but their expressions told another story. They were kneeling. To him, you are the one, a woman breathed. The king from the vision, the one who walks without fear. The gods notice you, the ragged man said. The throne notices you. Even chaos notices you. Who will you serve? Gilgamesh looked at their faces, every age, every suffering, every hope crushed yet clinging to a spark. He understood the question. He also understood the danger. A king is made not by crown, but by the people who believe in him. He exhaled. I am not your savior, he said softly. The crowd bowed deeper. But if you must kneel, he continued, voice rising like distant thunder, kneel for humanity, Not gods, not demons, not thrones. The ground trembled. Warp currents shifted. The golden whisper stirred like a heart starting to beat again. High above, in the palace, the custodians felt it. In the warp, the chaos gods paused. Something had changed. Gilgamesh had stepped into the role he once rejected, not as a conqueror, not as a god, not as a primarch, but as a king choosing his people. And the galaxy trembled at the implication. Night fell on Terra like a shroud stitched together from smoke, sorrow, and the dying dreams of 1 trillion souls. In the underhives, where sunlight existed only as a rumor children whispered to each other before collapsing into sleep, Gilgamesh stood among the broken, the forgotten, and the damned. The crowd dispersed slowly after his words, not out of fear, not because they had been ordered to, but because misery had left them no strength to linger. Yet something fundamental had changed. In a place where hope had long been a corpse rotting beneath the rubble, a spark flickered. A spark shaped like a man who refused to bow. Gilgamesh felt it moving through the people like the faint tremor before an earthquake. Humanity's psychic field, normally a miasma of exhaustion, dread, and blind devotion, shifted just slightly. Just enough that he felt the golden whisper from the distant throne turn its attention toward him again. Not commanding, not demanding, simply watching. The Inquisitor approached from behind, flanked by 2 custodians who seemed permanently caught between protecting her from Gilgamesh and protecting him from her. "You're gathering followers," she said, voice low, wary. Even without trying, Gilgamesh did not turn. "No," he said. "They gather because they see someone who listens." "The Imperium listens," she snapped. He looked at her then, and his gaze pierced deeper than any blade. "You listen to threats, to heresy, to treason, but you do not listen to suffering." Her jaw tightened. The custodians shifted uneasily. They were warriors of legends, but not even they could deny the truth in his words. The Inquisition crushed rebellion, purged corruption, rooted out chaos at every turn, but those actions were reactive, never transformative. They were bandages wrapped around a corpse. "Terra is bleeding," Gilgamesh said, "and no amount of fire or scripture will heal it." The Inquisitor's face cracked just slightly. A sliver of something vulnerable slipped through. "You think you can heal it?" she whispered, almost begging him to say no. Gilgamesh sighed. "I can do what your empire cannot," he said. "I can walk among them as one of them." The custodian beside the Inquisitor shifted, armor clinking softly. "That is not your purpose," he said. "You were awakened for something greater." Gilgamesh turned fully toward the Golden Warrior. "You think greatness is built atop the misery of your people? You think empires thrive on obedience alone?" The custodian did not answer. He didn't need to. The Imperium's answer was carved into its architecture, its laws, its trillions of graves. Gilgamesh stepped closer. "A king who rules from a throne rules nothing," he said. "A king who walks among his people rules their hearts." The Inquisitor studied him, searching his face for lies, for manipulation, for any hint he was the beginning of a new heresy. She found none. "And what of the Emperor?" she asked quietly. "Will you defy his will?" Gilgamesh closed his eyes. He saw again the golden throne, the agony etched into the corpse god's features, the crushing burden of 10,000 years, the psychic scream held behind walls of living gold, the dying flame of the Astronomicon flickering with each passing hour. He opened his eyes. "I will not defy him," he said, "but neither will I perpetuate the empire built upon his suffering." The Inquisitor's breath caught. The custodians stiffened. It was the boldest statement he had yet spoken. If he were anyone else, they would have killed him instantly. But he was not anyone else. He was Gilgamesh, the first blueprint of humanity's demigods, the echo of a design older even than the Imperium, a relic that should not exist but did, and the Emperor himself had awakened him. Whether by intent or desperation, none could say. They moved upward again through the hive's skeletal towers, across bridges suspended over bottomless pits, through manufactorums that never slept. Everywhere they walked, Eyes followed. Workers paused mid-motion. Pilgrims stopped chanting. Soldiers hesitated before resuming their patrol. The custodians noticed. The Inquisitor noticed. Gilgamesh noticed. It was not worship. It was recognition. These people had spent their lives bending their knees to statues, images, and proclamations, but no statue ever looked back. No god ever walked beside them. No decree ever knelt in the dust to help bury a child. Gilgamesh had. They returned to the upper sanctums of the palace several hours later. The air grew cleaner, the halls widened, the people vanished. Terra's elite lived in silence carved from privilege. As they approached a set of towering doors, the custodian at their head halted, then turned. "This is where we part," he said. "The Captain General has summoned us." Gilgamesh regarded him. "You fear what I saw down below." The custodian did not deny it. "The lower levels are not your concern." Gilgamesh stepped closer until he was a breath away. "They are my concern," he said, "because humanity is my concern." The custodian stiffened, then bowed his head by the smallest fraction, a gesture Gilgamesh had not expected. "A king who speaks such words," the custodian murmured, "may yet remind us what we once fought for." He and his warriors departed without further explanation, leaving Gilgamesh alone with the Inquisitor. For a long moment, neither spoke. At last, she broke the silence. "Why did the Emperor awaken you?" she asked. "Tell me honestly." Gilgamesh inhaled slowly, his chest rising like a mountain drawing breath. "I do not know," he admitted. "Not fully." He looked to the distant ceiling where stained glass depicting the Emperor's victories glimmered faintly. "But I know this. He showed me the truth of the Imperium. Its victories, its losses, its sins, its glories, its wounds." He placed a hand over his heart. "And then he showed me myself." The Inquisitor frowned. "What does that mean?" Gilgamesh's eyes glowed faintly. "It means I am not his son. I am not his warrior. I am not his heir." He turned toward the window, watching the endless city churning beneath the perpetual twilight. "I am his reminder." She blinked. "Reminder of what?" Gilgamesh looked at her then, and in his gaze she saw something fierce enough to shame angels. That humanity belongs to itself. The Inquisitor's breath trembled. This man, this relic, was dangerous. Not because he sought power, but because he refused it. Not because he wanted worship, but because he rejected it. Not because he threatened the Imperium's armies, but because he threatened its lies. And every empire ever built feared truth more deeply than any enemy. At dawn, Gilgamesh stood upon the battlements of the Imperial Palace. The sky above was a canvas of smog and rust, smeared with the faint, dying glow of the Astronomicon. In the distance, hive towers pierced the heavens like broken spears. Pilgrim chants drifted upward from the masses gathering for morning rites. The air shook with a constant undertone of engines, crowds, and the psychic groans of a world suffocating beneath its own existence. Gilgamesh leaned on the parapet. Far out in the galaxy, he sensed movement vast, terrible shapes circling in the warp. Demonic legions gathering around rifts like vultures around corpses. The eyes of the chaos gods fixed upon him, calculating, wondering how to corrupt, break, or exploit him. He ignored them. Instead, he listened to the heartbeat of Terra. The heartbeat of humanity. A whisper brushed the back of his mind, soft, pained, exhausted. The Emperor. Not a command. Not a decree. Only a whisper. And Gilgamesh whispered back, "I hear you, but I am not your slave." Another whisper. Softer. Almost relieved. He closed his eyes. The galaxy was dying. The Imperium was rotting. Chaos was rising. He was one man. One ancient king. One forgotten prototype. And yet, he felt the possibility of something new. Not hope. Hope was fragile. Overestimated. Misunderstood. This was purpose. A purpose he had not felt since Enkidu walked beside him. A purpose born of suffering, truth, and unyielding will. He opened his eyes. Terra was vast. The Imperium was eternal. The galaxy was infinite. And still, Gilgamesh, son of Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, the first echo of the Primarchs, smiled. "Let the gods tremble," he murmured, "for I walk now as a king reborn." Above him, the Astronomicon flickered once, not weakening, but brighter, as if something on the golden throne had stirred, and for the first time in 10,000 years, Terra whispered not of death, but of change.